Welcome to What Dogs Have Taught Me. I'm your host, Julie Hart, and I'm very excited about today's episode. My guest today is very well known in the horse world. I reached out to him after reading his book, Principles of Training, to thank him for writing such an insightful and helpful book about feral dogs that is really about horses. I have also watched many of his videos and would love to attend one of his horsemanship clinics as an observer. When I asked him why he agreed to be on my podcast, he said, "Why not?" Which is the same thing I asked myself when I asked him to be a guest. Why not? What did I have to lose? Please help me welcome Warwick Schiller. Warwick is a lifelong equestrian from Australia that moved to the U.S. in his 20s to pursue training horses. He has coached champions of the National Reining Horse Association before turning towards attuned approach to horses. His website is titled warwickschiller.com. The subtitle under his website is Attuned Horsemanship. The chapter in his book that I read first was chapter 13, titled Relationship Before Horsemanship. This resonated with me as it is what I try to achieve when rehabilitating feral dogs. Warwick has many ways to learn from him on his website with online videos, his book Principles of Training, and in-person horsemanship clinics, plus connection and attunement retreats. I would highly encourage anyone working with dogs to at least buy his book to learn his principles. Now, since you all probably want to hear Warwick instead of me, I'll go to the podcast where Warwick gives insights on horses and how his principles can apply to life overall, nature, and dogs. I must admit, I did not know about you until a few months ago when a friend of mine recommended your book. And now I'm like a fan and I love your book. It's just been so, I think it could be so helpful. Obviously, you probably know this to people outside of the horse world that just work with animals. And I work with feral dogs. And so my friend said, "Oh, you should read this book. There's a lot of similarities." And I was looking for something written about dogs that was similar to what I was doing, but I found it in your book about horses. So I was just so happy to find someone else that had similar feelings. And I was like, well, maybe I'm not crazy. Maybe I'm onto something because someone else has done it too. So the subtitle of your book, of course, as soon as I looked it up, the book is Principles of Training. And the subtitle caught my eye because it says, Understanding the Relationship Between You and Your Horse and Why Effective Training Works. And for me, relationship in dogs is super important. And I don't think it's talked about enough. So right away when I saw it, I'm like, oh yeah, I'm buying this book. And I think I read it, I don't know, 2 days, which is unusual for me because usually I'm a little busy doing some other things, but I made the attempt to just sit down and read it. And of course, it has underlines and highlights all through it. So I thought, I'd love to have you on here because I think a lot of what you have in the book will help people with their dogs and horses, if anyone horse-oriented is listening. But
and children and spouses, because it's not too much different.
Yeah. And I mean, we've evolved with dogs and horses in our lives, so it makes sense that we would have similar communication needs, I think.
Yeah, well, I mean, really, it's about the mammalian nervous system. Any mammal, if you're a mammal, you are wired for connection, and your whole nervous system being regulated relies on that. You know what I mean? So if you don't have that, you're well, the way we evolved, if you don't have that connection, something's wrong. You've lost your tribe. You're out in the wild, and you're going to get eaten. There's I can't see it on my shelf here. Maybe. Oh yeah, there's a book. I've got a big fat book called The 10 Types of Humans, and in that book, they were talking about some Australian researchers who were studying fish on the Great Barrier Reef. And there's this kind of fish that will swim up beside another fish and stay there and kind of do this bit of a dancey kind of a thing and then go away. And they thought it was a mating ritual. They thought it was all sorts of things. And finally they figured out what it is the hierarchy in that group of fish is based on size. And size and seniority. And if you get bigger than a fish that's senior to you, everything's out of alignment, and so they'll kick you out off the reef into the vast ocean. Basically, you're going to get eaten. So what these fish are doing is they're comparing their size to the other fish. This is crazy. Comparing their size to the other fish, and if they think they're getting bigger than them, they will stop eating. They will go on a diet, and the ratio is 0.87 or something or other. So when they get bigger than 0.87 of the size of the fish next up in the hierarchy, they will self-diet. And so that's how important it is to be part of to be part of a community. If the rules of that, if the thing that's going to get you rejected by that community happens to be your size compared to someone senior than you, you're self-selected. But think about that. Think about how important that is to any animal, fish, whatever, that lives in community. The thing you don't want to do is be rejected, is kicked out. And that's why kind of we have mental health crises and stuff because of childhood stuff about that. So, it's sorry, getting off a tangent here.
It's all relevant because, dogs, of course, are pack animals. Humans are pack animals. And part of what I see, because I've done rescue for 15 years and I've brought various dogs in and I integrate them into the pack, is they really value that stability and that group working together. And I think it's a little underestimated how powerful that can be for a dog, and healing as well when they come from a place that's not stable. And then they get into a stable environment or a place that's not safe. And then they get into a safe environment. It can do a world of good, but that's crazy that the fish can actually, I think, and part of what I have in my questions is that I think people sometimes underestimate animals' abilities to weigh all of these things, whether it's, I don't know, do you think that's an instinctual thing with that fish or a learned thing? But either way, they can do it, and it's fascinating.
Yeah, there's got to be some sort of instinctual thing in there, because the fish aren't, the fish's mum didn't go, okay, make sure you don't get 0.87 the size of the next fish up. But, they've studied this fish forever and they've captured him and weighed him and, yeah. But, yeah, I thought that study was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah. And of course, in dogs, the size doesn't always matter because usually the Chihuahua is the ringleader, and the larger dogs sometimes submit, to the Chihuahua. It's more about attitude, I think.
But then again, you think about dogs, though, they've been selective. They're not kind of natural. Like they've been selectively bred for certain things. And if if you probably heard the story about, I think it was a Russian guy was capturing foxes and trying to domesticate foxes, and they would breed the ones that you could approach in their cage without snarling too much. They bred those to the same kind of ones, and the wilder ones they let go. And what did it take? 7 generations or something or other. Their snouts started to get shorter, and they started to develop white patches on them. You think how many dogs we have that are, got that foreshortened snout to make them look more human-like, And so we've interfered with Mother Nature there, and then it's kind of the same thing with horses. People observe horses in environments that lack enough resources and enough room and possibly enough, if you think about with horses, the 3 Fs, food, forage, friendship, and freedom, like room to move, friends, a herd, and access to constant grazing. They look at a horse in a situation that doesn't have those three, and then the outcome of that they project onto the horse, like, oh, that's how horses do things. Like, no, that's a bit of a screwed up system. But if you look at us too, we're all a bit screwed up too. Like, if you think about the parenting style that would have been around when you were younger and I was younger, was you put your child in the other room and you let them cry themselves to sleep.
Mm-hmm.
Who was it? It was Dr. Spock that did that. That's not Mr. Spock with the pointy ears. That's Dr. Spock. But that's totally against how we should have been raised. And so, if you think about that, being put in another room and let yourself cry yourself to sleep, your nervous system it's going into shutdown from the very beginning. Everybody has a part of that in them,
Yeah.
unless their parents were hippies or whatever, or were way ahead of the curve and understood that co-sleeping is part of how we evolved and part of that connection that we need,
Yeah. Well, and so it's interesting because in New Mexico, we have a very large free roaming dog population compared to the rest of the United States. And in my neighborhood, we also have wild horses. So, and the horses, I just moved here a year ago, so I'm still, and they're not easy to observe because I never know where they're going to be. But I see them running, I see them playing, they're mating, they're having babies, all kinds of things. And then the dogs here tend to be more stable in general, I think, than the dogs I've seen where I lived other places, because they're selecting their own mates. So in a way, the free roaming dogs are a problem, but then also for me, they've been a blessing because I get to see dogs that haven't been tainted, let's say, by human intervention. So it's fascinating to work with them. But that's how I got involved in it, because there's such a need here of those dogs they get trapped and then they're in the shelter, and then I got interested. So, but what have you seen with the wild horses that's different since I have them running around?
Well, I haven't really studied wild horses at all. I've read lots of stuff of people who have studied wild horses, but, studying like ethologists, so people who spend their life studying wild horses. I think, you don't have enough lifetimes to experience everything yourself. You have to rely on other people's research too. And then you have to figure out, is the researcher, the observer, are they projecting some of their stuff onto what they actually see? Is that exactly what's going on? I've seen people that have studied horses and come up with all sorts of really interesting thoughts about what's going on. And I don't think that's what's going on at all. But then you have other people who studied horses like, yeah, I think that is more true to what's going on. And maybe I'm just projecting my stuff on there too, but you experience your own reality, and all I can do is experience it from my perspective. But then like, I am quite empiric in what I do with horses. So over the years I've tried things, and maybe I've tried weird things like I'm doing now. And then you look at the science, and then you realize, oh, there's a science behind why this works. I didn't do it. I didn't read the science and then went out to try and duplicate it. This stuff seemed to be working. Like I used to do lots of clinics. I don't do as many clinics now, but, I used to work with 12 different horses every weekend. And so when I started experimenting with new things, I had lots of students to experiment on. And pretty soon the horses start to tell you if this is a good idea or this is not a good idea. You know what I mean? And so, yeah, I've been kind of lucky that way. And I experiment with things, and The horses tell you it works or it doesn't.
I think it's important to experiment, and I find people sometimes are afraid to because of the fear of failure gets in the way, or they're not sure, the uncertainty.
But I do think, though, that a lot of people that experiment don't have enough knowledge to experiment yet.
Mm.
It's kind of like the Sir Richard Branson quote, or I don't know if it was his, but I've heard it from him. First you need to learn all the rules, then you can break the rules. I think experimenting is breaking the rules. So you kind of got to have quite a bit of knowledge about, I tell people, if you want to, learn this stuff, pick someone who has a process. Okay. Follow their process from start to finish with at least one horse, like start to finish, like devote some time to it.
Mm.
And once you get through all that, then if you want to start cherry picking, do so, or maybe do it with somebody else. And when you get through it, then start cherry picking. But what you'll find when you go through someone's process from start to finish, that there's a lot of little stuff in the beginning that seems like it's a lot of work that doesn't seem like it's that important. And if you don't stick it out till the end, you won't realize that, this part here that I would have thought is very difficult is actually very easy. And it's because of that foundation and the way that foundation was laid back in the beginning. And if you don't stick with someone's process from start to finish, you will never, and that's a principle really, but you will never grasp how important those little things are. What people tend to do, think about like a balanced diet. What people tend to do with, say, the horses or cherry picking information off the internet, if we're talking about horse training here, if these horse training techniques that they chose were like a supermarket, they don't go in and go, I'm going to have a balanced diet. They're like, okay, I don't like asparagus, I don't like broccoli, and I don't really like vegetables. I like the chip aisle. I have lots of chips, and the chocolate aisle. I have lots of chocolate. And I like beer. You know what I mean? Like they go around and they choose all the things they like. And in any process, there's a lot of stuff you don't like. And it doesn't necessarily mean you don't like it. It's like, this is actually not the part I enjoy.
Mm-hmm.
And, it's the same thing with like nature. We don't have summertime all the time. You have seasons, and, there's seasons of lots of growth like in the springtime, and then in the fall things start to fall off and die, and then there's no growth in the wintertime that comes back again. And I think it's the same thing with, getting back to my horse training thing here. People tend to want to cherry pick all the things that are easy. Mm. And then they kind of go, I tried that guy's process and it didn't work. Did you really try it? Yeah.
Good advice for dogs too.
Oh, it's how life works. You know what I mean? You can't be, like raising kids, you can't be one person. You have to be all the people. You can't be their best friend all the time. You have to be the adult some of the times. But it's how you do that. It's the art to having boundaries without being angry about those boundaries, without either, shrinking back or puffing up. I love the Brené Brown quote. She says, don't shrink back, don't puff up, just hold your sacred space. And that's a hard thing to do, because if you lie on the side of shrinking back, when you get to where, yes, I'm going to actually have a boundary, then you tend to be too angry and you stay there too long. Or if you're an angry person and you got to get rid of that, you might get back to where you're too timid. I had a guy ask me years ago, he's not a horse person, he was a firefighter, but he said, my wife, she's into horses, and she's read this quote that says, your horse is a reflection of you. And he looked at me and he said, does that mean if my horse is an asshole, I'm an asshole? And I said, no, actually, that's not it. It's almost reflects the shadow side. So like if you are quick to anger, you might have a really timid horse. Or if you're really timid, you might have a really pushy horse. you don't usually get, if I'm timid, I have a timid horse, or if I'm angry, I have an angry horse. You can sometimes, but a lot of times it's the opposite. It's still a reflection, but it's not a direct reflection. But it's reflecting, the way you treat them will be reflected back to you, so to speak.
Yeah, of course, makes sense, right? I do find though with people, if I pair anxious person with an anxious dog, it's usually they're going to increase their anxiety together.
Oh yeah, yes.
So I try not to make that match when I'm adopting out dogs, but yes, I do. That's interesting. And I wonder, well, on that note, that makes me think why people are attracted to certain dogs in the first place. With their, if they're attracted to the opposite type of dog as them, or if they're attracted to similar.
Yeah, I mean, these days I've been down the trauma-informed rabbit hole for a number of years now, and it's almost like every decision we make is based on stuff from childhood, missing things from childhood, you know what I mean? And it's quite the rabbit hole, but it does help you understand people, and it also does give you a lot more empathy for people, because you know that the decision that they're making is not based on exactly what's happening right now, but it's the sum total of all the things. One of the chapters in the book is called the don't go to bed angry principle. And I talk about how, there's a thing in the therapeutic world called trigger stacking. And trigger stacking might be if you clean the house on Sunday and you told your kids, okay, if you have a snack when you come home from school on Monday, clean up after it, and then you go to work and you have a great day, everything goes well, and you come home from work and the kids have left 3 crumbs on the counter, without even thinking about it, you'd sweep them up in your hand and throw them in the sink. Whereas if everything went wrong all day long and you got home and you walk in, you see 3 crumbs on the counter and you lose your mind, that's trigger stacking. So that's not responding to the crumbs in that moment. It's bringing all that other stuff with you too, And, you see it a lot with horses. Horses that people say they spook out of nowhere. They didn't spook out of nowhere. They would have been building tension but holding it in, and then it gets to where they can't hold it, that last bit of tension they can't hold anymore, and out comes the spook or the buck or the rear or the bolt or whatever that thing is.
Yeah, and I think, well, dogs is very similar, of course, but if they live in a stressful environment to begin with them, and then they go out, anything added to that is just sends them over the edge. So I try to lower the stress in the home first,
Right.
and then work on the outside stuff. So we lower, the adrenaline, cortisol, and I know you and your wife do a lot of work with the vagus nervous system, which I'm just starting to comprehend, because some of the terminology takes some practice to understand, and how important it is, and how we can improve dogs' vagus nervous systems by just allowing them to do their natural behaviors. For example, like sniffing for a dog. But I was curious too. One question I was thinking of that I didn't write down was, if you see horses that are allowed to do more of their natural behaviors, if that helps them overall.
Oh yeah, most certainly. Yeah. And a lot of times people are trying to, like you just said it perfectly, people want to solve the problem with the dog out and about, but not solve the beginning of the problem at home. That's what most people want to do. They want to solve the problem that's actually a symptom of the real problem, instead of being able to address the real problem. And so, that's why things like I wrote the book, to try to get people to understand, it's not a how-to, it's a why. Why the how-to works. And if you understand why the how-to works, you can probably apply it more skillfully, or you can probably start to invent stuff on your own, rather than relying on, you have to do this in this situation. Like, why do you have to do that in that situation? Why does it work? What does the horse think of it? all that sort of stuff. And I think it helps people make better decisions.
I think they can apply it to more situations than just if you had like an example in the book that said do A, B, C. If they can think about the principles, then they could apply those to much more situations. It's a broader approach, I think.
Yeah, if you are learning how to do something with, say, your horse, but didn't you fully understand the whys of that decision, then you're better prepared to, it's like the old story about the lady who, she always cuts the end off her Thanksgiving ham. You know that one?
I
Lady's
have
always
that
always
one.
cuts the end off a Thanksgiving ham, and her kid says, "Mum, why do you cut the end off the Thanksgiving ham?" She goes, "Well, my mum always did." So they call grandma up and they go, "Grandma, why'd you cut the end off the Thanksgiving ham?" She goes, "Well, my mum always did." So they go to the nursing home to the great grandmother, and she's in bed there, like, "Why did you always cut the end off the Thanksgiving ham?" She goes, "Well, I never had a pan big enough to fit the whole thing in." You know what I mean? If you don't know why she was cutting the thing up, you think it's just a thing we do. But if you've got a bigger pan, you don't need to cut the end off the ham.
That's so funny.
Think about cultural and societal conditioning about ideas about anything. I think for me, the more I've learned about, first there was all the training stuff, but then you learn about the psychology of horses, and then especially the psychology of humans, and then the shared experience of mammals, and then get to where, I'm starting to unravel some of this societal and cultural conditioning. Think about religion's impact on that. Like, for thousands of years, man has dominion over the beasts and we're at the top of the triangle, sort of thing. That's not how it works. Nature is very collaborative. If you in nature, if there's a poisonous plant, there's a plant that grows nearby that actually has the antidote to that plant. Who
Yep.
knew? I was in Kenya a few years ago doing some clinics, and I was on this lady had like 500 acres of rangeland sort of thing where a house was. And so you can go from a walk from the house and you could see zebra and wildebeest and giraffes and whatever. But the first giraffes I saw, I was walking along with this lady who was she'd been a safari guide in Africa for quite a long time, British lady. We walk along and these giraffes walk up and start eating this acacia tree, which is, those flat top ones you see in The Lion King. And they start eating away. And she said, now, if you watch them, they'll only eat that for a certain period of time and then they'll move on. And I said, oh, why is that? Are the giraffes conservationists or something, And she said, no, actually, the tree can tell it's being eaten. It can sense it's being eaten, and it secretes this nasty tasting substance into the leaves. And I'm like, oh, okay. And so the giraffes eat there for a while, but then they walk off. And she said, if you watch them, they will not go to the next tree. They will go like skip 2 or 3 trees and then start eating again. And I said, and why is that? And she said, because the trees can actually talk to each other. But the distance, the trees can't talk for large distances. And I've researched it since then, and it turns out that it's actually, they emit a smell that some receptors in the leaves of the other trees actually pick up. When I first heard about it, I thought it was through the mycelium because they do communicate underground, but apparently it's a pheromone sort of thing. But anyway, think about all that sort of stuff. Like,
Yeah.
or if you've ever watched My Octopus, the documentary My Octopus Teacher, is like, okay, we're probably the dumbest creature on the planet. You know what I mean? We're the least evolved creature on the planet. We've got these huge brains and nothing else works very well,
Definitely the most self-destructive, I think.
Yeah, most certainly. And so it's, when you're talking about, well, I talk about training horses, you're talking about training feral dogs, but I think in order to start to interact with them differently, you got to kind of start to unravel some of the stories that we've been told, or the things that we think are absolutes that are true, and Not really.
Yeah. I mean, I find my problem is when I start to research something, then I go way down this side shoot rabbit hole that takes me up down this path. And then I have to go back to actually like staying on track for what I was doing. But it's,
Yeah, that's where I like to use other people's research because, well, okay, think about the book that I wrote.
yeah,
Okay. That's the sort of research I like to read, where someone else has done all the work and figured the stuff out and then put it in a pretty simple term. People send me articles all the time like, this is a really good experiment they did one time. And if it's a scientific article and the first paragraph starts with abstract, my mind goes, and like this, the first sentence, I can't even turn it into English. You know what I mean? I can't read those sort of scientific articles because I'm not a scientist type
yeah.
guy. So I do like things that are, put into layman's terms, or just, there was a book I read earlier on called The Nature of Horses by a guy named Stephen Badansky. I think he might have written a book about dogs too, didn't he? You know if he wrote a book about dogs?
Oh no. I'll have to look it up.
But yeah, it was, he'd taken all this research that was done, compiled it all together and put it in one easy to, it's kind of like, I don't know if you've ever read any Malcolm Gladwell's books, but like he's a dot joiner and he takes all these ideas and joins the dots. He doesn't invent the dots. He just grabs the dots and puts them together. That's the sort of stuff that I find it easier to take in.
Well, and I think that is one thing I appreciated about your book was that it's 220 pages or so, I think. And you cover a lot of ground in ways that most people can understand, which is really, the useful part of the book. If no one can understand it, then it's not going to be helpful. So I appreciated that. But one thing I wanted to ask you is, do you have a dog or more than one?
We have 3 dogs.
I have 3. What kinds?
We have a border collie, and then we have a Yorkie poo, which I think he might be a teacup Yorkie crossed with a miniature poodle. He's little,
Little guy.
And then we have what we think is he's a rescue, but we think he's an Aussie doodle. He's a mini Aussie doodle. So he's probably, I think the Yorkie poo is about 9 pounds. The Aussie doodle's about 15 pounds. They're not very big dogs.
Okay. And then as a follow-up to that, what differences and similarities do you notice from dog to human to horse to human? Because I know one's a predator, one's a prey animal.
But they're both mammals.
Yes.
What I find the big difference is, if you mess up a Yorkie poo, you're not going to die.
Yeah.
Like the sheer size and strength and quick turn on flight instinct of horses is what makes it important to get it right.
Mm.
Our dogs are untrained heathens. You know what I mean?
Pounds.
What's that?
Because they're 9 pounds.
Yeah. They're untrained heathens. I wouldn't say they're out of control or anything like that, but they're not. There's not been a lot of training. Anything that's there is probably out of kind of connection sort of thing. But that's not dangerous.
Right.
Whereas with horses, the ramifications of not working right are quite bigger than with dogs, put it that way.
Quite a few of my clients have worked with horses in the past, and it's always interesting because I tell them, don't let your dog push you around physically or any of these things. And they're like, that's what I do with my horse. I never thought about it with the dog. And so I've always wondered, like you said, with the horse, it's much more important size wise. And so once I say that, they totally get it, because they just apply what they know to their dog, and it
Right. Yeah.
works. So, yeah, it's interesting. But, and do you find that, do you use your principles in your book for your dogs?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Well, the principles apply to everything.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Those happen to be horse training principles, but think about what's the first chapter? Work with the horse you have today. That's like work with the wife you have today. Work with the kid you have today. Work with the dog you have today. Work with the car you have today. I have a little analogy I use, and I call it milk and eggs. And I'll, if I'm doing a clinic and I say to the crowd, I'll say, "Does anybody here shop for milk and eggs?" Because not everybody shops milk and eggs these days, And then someone, they'll go, "Yeah," and I go, "Okay, so where do you go shopping?" And they'll say, "Safeway." And I said, "Do you ever write a shopping list?" And they say, "Yeah." And I said, "So it's quite possible that you could walk out the front door of your house with your list for the day, and it says Safeway at the top, and under that it says milk and eggs." And they go, "Yeah." And I said, "Would you walk up to your car, go to get in, but if you noticed you had a flat front tire, would you go, I wonder, should I pump that up today? Let me look on my list. Do I have tire pumping on my list? No, I have Safeway milk and eggs." That's not working with the car you have today.
Mhm.
You're assuming your car's in the same place it was you left yesterday. I'm going to use that car to go to the store to get my milk and eggs. And a lot of people with their horses, they'll have a plan for the day. Like my friend's coming over, we're going to go trail riding, and they go to catch their horse, and he's acting a bit funny today. Oh, well, don't have that on my list. I don't have investigating that on my list. I'm going to go for a trail ride. And then they have an accident, and then look, in hindsight, they kind of go, "Yeah, well, he kind of was acting a bit different, but I was really thinking about the trail ride." So it's really about being present with what's in front of you. So, that's not just a horse thing. Don't go to bed angry. That's what marriage advice most people are given at their wedding. Create a tool before you use a tool. If that applies to anything. If you don't have the tool for the job, you've got to get the tool first before you can use the tool for the job. And I think all the principles are relatable to life. Do the opposite. If you need to put on weight, eat more food. If you need to lose weight, eat less food. There's no right or wrong. The average male's daily calorie intake should be 2,000 calories, but it depends on what you need. You know what I mean? So you got to do the opposite of that. I think that the principle. Well, that's the thing I'm trying to get people to understand too, especially when I do clinics and things. Is a lot of people think that, oh my God, horse training is all this stuff, and I can't remember it all or whatever. And what I try to do is relate it to, you already know how to do this in the rest of your life, and that's usually when I come up with the milk and eggs thing. I go, you wouldn't drive to the store on a flat tire because you didn't have tire pumping on your thing today. That is a life principle. That's not a horse training principle.
Yeah.
It's something you need to bring from life to horse training, or dog training, or whatever. You know what I mean? So the thing I'm trying to get people to realize is, if you basically understand how the world works, you understand how horses work, and you already do understand how the world works. No one drives to the store on their flat tire because they're intent on getting their milk and their eggs, or you're about to leave home, you've got a business meeting first thing this morning, you spill coffee down the front of your blouse. You don't go, "Well, I didn't have wearing 2 different blouses today on my list. I've got a meeting to get to." You know what I mean? Simple things like that. You don't even think about it. You stop and you fix that there. Whereas a lot of times people with their horses, they've got this plan in mind, and that plan is not adjustable.
Mm.
And there's a good saying, something about, be solid in your goals, but be variable in the path to getting there.
Yeah, I have what does one of my mentors says, ask the question. Oh, how does it go? Now I'm not going to be able to remember it properly, but it says something about ask the question over and over until you get the right answer. So it's, for example, if a dog doesn't want, I don't know, a leash put on, whatever it might be, and there's many, many ways to try and achieve that. So both parties are happy with the outcome. But you don't just not put the leash on the dog.
Right.
So, and that's, of course, what the feral dogs have challenged me more and more with, is to think, how can I do this? Because the normal ways you would do that don't really work. And then, of course, not all feral and fearful dogs are the same. So you have to look at what that dog is telling you. If it likes you approaching sideways, if it likes you approaching backwards, if it wants to smell the leash first, if it doesn't. I mean, there's all these variables.
Right.
But I mean, that's what I love, is the challenge of having to change and be very observant of the dog. I find it very interesting, to figure out like how to do that.
See, that's what I love. Like, one of the things I love about doing clinics and things is it's like a it's like your Sherlock Holmes, and you're trying to, I actually love I just did a clinic in Washington State on the weekend, and there were some horses there that were really, really interesting, to where, oh, that doesn't work. How about this? What about this? Oh, what about this? One of them would change nervous system. Like, he'd go from anxious to shut down to, like he could very easily go and change. He was like 3 different horses, and he'd be a different horse every 5 minutes, and you had to adjust to what the horse he was being. I think it's fun, and I was trying to tell people, if you can be curious about things instead of thinking about, I want to fix this behavior because I don't want this behavior here. It's like, I wonder why this behavior is here. Where's that coming from? And I think the more you do that, the more they get to trust you, because it's obvious you're there to help, not there to fix. It's not all about your agenda.
Well, I have to tell you a story where I used, now I don't know which chapter it's in, but it's about acknowledging the animal and letting them know you're hearing what they're telling you. And so and this was on a Zoom I was doing with someone in Oklahoma, which adds a whole nother layer of problems when you're trying to teach someone how to handle a dog via Zoom. But they had a feral Malinois, and she was just trying to approach it to get the leash on. And I kept in mind, what your book had said, as well as, some experience. But every time she would move towards that dog, he would growl. And of course, we didn't want to just overwhelm the dog by just forcing the leash on. That's not a good way to earn trust. And so I said, well, every time he growls, and with dogs like that, you don't want to make eye contact. But I said, every time he growls, just make it very obvious you're looking away from him. And so it's almost an exaggerated motion. And she was able to gradually move closer and closer to that dog, and he stopped growling, and she was able to put the leash on him that way. So it was very cool. And it worked really well, and it didn't stress out the dog or, end in someone getting bit or anything like that. So
what's really interesting is there's something that I use a lot, and it's in that subject you were just talking about then, that I actually got from dog trainers, which was actually, I actually got it from horse trainers who got it from dog trainers. But in the horse training world, it's called CAT-H, which is constructional approach training, H for horses. But it was originally someone, Ruiz, you probably know who it was usually, it was originally used in fearful dogs. And it's about it's about staying below their threshold and communicating your awareness of things. But the place it gets to is where the dog wants, it's about proximity. The dog wants more distance away from them. And so you do it on such a subtle level that they're not worried, but when they show you a more relaxed posture, then you retreat. But it's subtle. But yeah, when I started reading about that stuff, it was kind of things I'd been playing with horses for a number of years, and it just gave me like the next refinement
Yeah.
of it.
It's a little counterintuitive sometimes. But well, I was just working with a dog on getting her nails trimmed, and so I'm trying the same. Okay, you're telling me you're uncomfortable, but I don't want to reward the dog for pulling away. And so I'd kind of wait until she calms down and then let go of her foot. Kind of playing around with it some. And it's, a lot of people would go, oh, that's so simple. Just grab the foot and clip, clip, clip. But I want to have this dog be okay with it. And she's not a fan of getting her nails trimmed right now. She's not terrible. So yeah, I'm going to research that more, because when I was doing a little thumbing through the book for this, I came across that again, and I had forgotten to look into it last time. So I need to make notes.
I'm trying to think of the persons. There were two researchers, Rosales and Ruiz.
Look it up. Was this a long time ago, or is this fairly recent?
2021.
Okay.
Some of the early stuff was 2007, but it's okay. So here we go. And I just looked it up on the internet. Here we go. Application of the constructional approach. To address an animal that has a history of presenting a fear aggressive response to the presence of the trainer, the following steps can be applied. Number 1, start far enough away so the animal is aware of the person but shows calm and relaxed body language. Number 2, so that might be a long way. Approach so that the animal can see the person until the slightest body language, or none, is observed, and so that the animal acknowledges the person is moved. When this happens, stop moving. Then, number 3, wait till the animal presents any behavior that's acceptable that would be considered calm, looks away, scratches, rests its head, eats, closes eyes, etc., then walk away. And then repeat this and raise the criteria and move closer and closer. But the thing you are doing is you are moving away when they give you, just like with you holding that paw, you're moving away when they give you a better response. But I think initially, and this is actually, I learned this from a trauma therapist, but initially, for me, what I do is I retreat at the first sign of a no. And actually, before, well, that's what the trauma therapist said. For me, it's retreat at the first sign of recognition that you're there. That might be a no, but it also might be a curiosity, like, what are you doing? And when you do that, that's one of the principles of one of the chapters in the book is called relationship before horsemanship. And so that step, let's say I was trying to approach a horse. Well, actually, let's say I had a flag on a stick, and I wanted to get this horse good with the flag touching it. Okay, and I had that flag behind me. The horse is standing in front of me. I would take that flag out from behind me, and as soon as they noticed it, whether they looked towards it out of curiosity or looked away as in fear, it doesn't matter which one, I would take it away. And I would so this is not about shaping their behavior. This is about communicating your awareness of their awareness or their concern, whichever it might be. That's step 1. Then step 2 would be bring the bag out, leave it there, and wait until you get a more positive response than whatever their first one was. So if they looked away slightly, they might, and it doesn't keep approaching, they might go, what is that thing doing? When they look at it, you take it away. That's kind of the step 2 thing. But I have found that, and I did versions of that for years, but I have found step one, taking it away when they become aware of it, and it doesn't matter if it's in a good way or a bad way, is communicating your awareness to their awareness. That's connection.
Mhm.
And so that's relationship before horsemanship. So that first step would be relationship. The second step is more horsemanship, like I'm trying to change your perception about this thing, but there's still a lot of relationship in it. It's not like I just want to put the bag on you. When you notice that they feel more comfortable about it, more curious about it, whatever, then you take it away. And so I think if you can take that thing away as their thoughts change from, say, less confident to more confident, not only are you rewarding that behavior, I think you're communicating, I saw the change. I mean, that's for me, that's the secret sauce is communicating your awareness on such a level that you're communicating your awareness of a change in their thoughts.
Mm.
That's for me, that's been the game changer.
I think if the dogs just know that the people understand them and they feel they can, and for these dogs, it's the first meaningful conversation they've ever had with a person. Usually, I imagine their interactions with people haven't been so positive if they've had any. And sometimes people leave food out for them and things like that, but not. It's not in a close quarters,
Right.
but I think, and again, like this is a lifelong quest for me, right, to perfect this and to be able to have perfect timing and all that stuff. But just if that dog goes, oh, she understood what I told her.
Right.
That
See,
right.
but that's connection. That's that's what makes the mammalian nervous system relaxed. And you think about as kids, if certain behaviors, and I don't mean writing on the walls, I mean communicating fears or worries or whatever are not listened to. Like, if you ever heard of the stop crying, I'll give you something to cry about parenting style, that's the opposite of connection. And so if you think about, like, if the child is having a bit of a meltdown over something or other, or they're concerned about something, if you listen to their concerns, it builds trust. And I think it's the same thing with the dogs and the horses. It's basically, I changed one of the words in the name of my business a few years ago to attuned.
Mm.
And attunement, the way it's been described to me, is the sense of being seen, being heard, feeling felt, and getting gotten. So having someone else understand your position, your perception of basically your reality, whether it's right or wrong, getting them to see things from your point of view. And that seems to be really what soothes the nervous system of any mammal.
Yeah, I half of me wishes I would have started working with dogs before I had kids. Because I probably would have done a better job with some of this.
Okay, so then you gotta make sure you don't beat yourself up for what you didn't know when you didn't know it.
My kids turned out wonderfully. They're awesome people. But there's always things you're like, ooh, I could have done that one thing better.
But if they learn about those things before they have kids, now you're getting somewhere.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Then you're making some traction in the world.
They're much better at that than I was at their age, by far. So.
Oh, I think the world's a totally different place. Like, mental health was not a subject,
right,
to talk about.
No.
Back when we were kids, you know what I mean? And
No.
nowadays we understand, not only we understand what a problem it is, but we understand where a lot of it comes from. A lot of it comes from, well, some of it comes from really bad things, but some of it comes from really, really simple things. Like, I used to think, oh, I had a perfect childhood, and then, no, I didn't have any big T traumas. I had a lot of little T traumas, and those little T traumas lodge in the body the same way the big T's do. And it really makes you aware that, like, oh, it's those little things that make a huge difference.
Mhm.
And think about all the little T. Anybody that had big T traumas, I guarantee they had as many little T's as I had. You know what I mean? And so they've got both of them. But yeah, understanding those little T's and just those little things that the developing mind needs. Think about, I read a book here a while ago, and I forget what it was about, what the book was about. So I can't remember why this study came up in the book, but these researchers went around the world and they were drawing blood on children all over the world and testing for all sorts of things. But one of the many things they were testing was protein levels. And there was these kids in Uganda that their protein levels were off the charts compared to every other kid in the world. Off the charts, like in a good way. Like, this would be great if we all had that. And they tried to figure out what it was that they were eating, and they couldn't isolate the diet because other people ate the same thing. Then they finally figured out that in that group, they all live kind of communally. I wouldn't say tribally because I don't think they're tribal anymore, but communally. And there's lots of grandmothers and aunties and whatever. And those infants, those kids, when they're infants, are rarely ever put down. They're always held close to another body. So we are supposed to have that, and having that happen to us makes us create these proteins that we're all supposed to have, and 99% of the world doesn't have, and we're supposed to, you know what I mean? Just simple things like that. And so it doesn't matter if it's a bad thing that happened to you, or if it's something that didn't happen to you that should have made a lot of good things happen. They're all, it's quite the rabbit hole. Well, I'm really interested in hunter-gatherer society these days, because what I'm finding is how hunter-gatherers view the world and how horses view the world is the same way, which means at some point in time, us and horses viewed the world the same way.
And what are those similarities that you found?
Well, I had a guy on the podcast who was one of the things he did was a documentary filmmaker, and he's made documentary films with the Khoisan Bushmen of the Kalahari, so some of the last surviving hunter-gatherer tribes. And, whenever a documentary filmmaking crew goes out to film any sort of hunter-gatherers, the chief comes out of the tribe and blah, 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 and things go on from there. But he's not the chief. So hunter-gatherers, the best person for the job has the job. Everybody has a job to do, and the best person for the job has the job. They don't have kings, queens, popes, bishops, prime ministers, presidents like we do. It's not a hierarchy. It's a co-op. It's a cooperative thing. We tend to think this guy's the chief, but he's not the chief. Okay. And then I had a lady on the podcast last year she's from Sweden, and she is one of the many things she does. She's a holistic. She's like a naturopath for horses. She does body work on horses and stuff. But something else she does, she's an animal communicator. But she's not an animal communicator like, she'll talk to your horse and tell you what Fluffy says. She had a very traumatic childhood and had an experience at the age of about 10. So she used to go to riding lessons to this little riding school in Sweden. Had an experience at about the age of 10 of, there it was like, if the pony's not doing what you want, whack him with the whip sort of thing. And she had an experience where her world turned inside out, and she basically inhabited the consciousness of the pony. She could feel what the pony was feeling. It wasn't just seeing things, it was feeling it. Anyway, so she gets messages from the collective consciousness of horses. And what the collective consciousness of horses said is, in like herd dynamics, there might be different roles, like a scout and a sentinel and a protector or whatever, but that horse is only in that role because, let's say, the scout or the sentinel, maybe the sentinel's eyes start going out on them or whatever, they will, or the lead me, whichever. But when they take somebody out of a job, they're not taking him out of a dominion over dynamic. They're taking it out of care for the whole dynamic. So if let's say the protector is not able to protect anymore, we're going to remove you. Now we're going to protect you, and we're going to put someone in your place who can protect us. But it's not that we want your job. If you're doing the job, fine. And it's when you can get into the mindset of care for versus power over, you can do the same thing. You can apply the same technique in the same situation, but if you have a different reason for doing it, I'm doing this to help rather than I'm doing this because I want to dominate you.
Mm-hmm.
There's a different energy to the actual thing that you're doing. It could be the same technique or whatever, but what's your reasoning for doing it? Are you kicking them out of that position because you want the bloody job and whatever and you're mad at them, or are you doing it out of care for? And it is really, talking about this at clinics and stuff has really made a difference in how people view things. Like if you have to set boundaries, you're not setting the boundary because you want to be the boss. You're setting boundaries because this is the best for everybody. And it's not a common way of looking at the world.
I mean, dogs seem, they do that. They don't really have, they're not on power trips, right?
Right. Yes.
And they know, I have 3 of my own at the moment, but one is the lookout. He's the alerter. The others will come rush to his aid. And what I found, a year and a half ago, I moved out of the city onto 13 acres. So it's magnified all of this because I can see it more. I have more space. Right. And in some ways, there's more danger, coyotes and things out here. The city's human danger. But if I participate in that with them, which humans very rarely actually do, they just say, stop barking. But if I get up and I go and I see what they're barking at, 1, I usually get to see something interesting. But 2, I'll go over there and I'll check it out. And I'll be like, yeah, it's okay, guys. And then they'll be more apt to stop barking and follow me back to the house. And I found that's the case with many things. If I participate with them and protect, take kind of that protector role, not totally, they're allowed to do that too. But it's fascinating how they're just so much more cooperative with me because I'm doing what they find important.
Well, yeah, that's the thing. If like the sentinel guy notices the stuff and starts barking, the others rush over and go, okay, what do you need help with? And you're in the kitchen like, shut up, dogs. It's like, you are not a valuable part of our community. Okay. And so a lot of times with horses, someone will get and they've got a herd of horses, they've got 2 or 3 horses or whatever, and they've got a new horse and they put it out there. And sometimes those other herd members will chase that horse off and not let them be a part of the herd. And this has been the real mental shift for me. It's not because they don't want them there. It's because of the way they're acting. They're saying you are not a valuable part of our community. Horses, basic stock in trade is the awareness of other horses. It's if you take a horse away from his herd mates and he's all wound up and wants to get back there, he doesn't want to get back there because they provide a feeling of physical safety. It's not like the bad guys come, they're going to beat him up. It's more, the more eyes there are to just casually keep an eye out for predators, the less on alert I have to be. And so something you'll do with a horse, say you're leading a horse along and they stop and they look at something like, what is that? The more you try to tell them, hey, pay attention over here, the more you're telling them you don't read the situation very good. If you stop and look at what they look at, and you can look at it with, just like you talked about, if you look at it with confidence, you can't look at it and go, oh, I don't see anything, but I think you're going to spook and you might jump on my toe and I've already got a sore toe. And you go down that mental rabbit hole. Whereas if you can look at what they're looking at and just look at it with confidence and think to yourself, yeah, no, I don't think it's going to hurt us at all. And when their focus changes, when they go from okay, it's okay, then your energy follows that back down. You don't try to lead them back down, because if they are thinking there's something to be bothered by, and this is where a lot of people with horses, I think, make a mistake, is their horse is like, is that going to come kill us? And the person is not looking at the thing. They're patting the horse in the neck like, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay, it's okay. And their heart rate's building, it's now 97 beats a minute. Saying it's okay while having a 97 beat per minute heart rate and not looking at the thing they're looking at is just communicating you're not very aware of the situation, which means the more of that you do, the less they'll trust you and the more stupid behaviors you'll end up with anyway.
Yeah, very similar. Very similar with dogs. And there's this whole thing like, oh, you can comfort your dog, it won't make them more afraid. It's like, but how are you comforting them? Are you really comforting them? Or are you trying to make yourself feel like you're doing something?
Right.
You
Yeah,
know,
that's just like that instance I said right then. So many, I mean, everybody thinks that's what you do. You pat the horse and say, good boy, whatever. If you're not aware of what they're aware of, sometimes I'll tell people a big part of creating connection with horses is communicating your awareness of their awareness. And then when you go further along, it's communicating your awareness of their awareness of your awareness of their awareness. And then when you get further along, you get what I mean? But that's their stock in trade. That's the thing that they desire from other. Because you can have a horse in a pasture. If he hasn't got a friend, you can give him a goat. Oh, now the goat's his best friend. What is it? It's just another sentient being who can help keep an eye out for danger. You think about why horses have, horse walks into a bar and the bartender says, why the long face? And the horse says, because I evolved on grasslands where the grass grew about a foot high, so I can graze the grass and still have my eyes above the level of the grass to keep an eye out for predators while I'm eating. The more sets of eyes, the more they can communicate, the more they can be aware. And see, a horse's main method of communication with each other is posture and energy. So let's say there's 4 horses grazing. Let's go north, south, east, west. Their heads are down, which means their posture's relaxed and their energy's relaxed. And then say the north one notices something and his head pops up. Like, what is that? This could be danger. The others will sense that change in energy and see that change in posture, and their heads will pop up like, what? Even if they don't see it. And then if he goes, oh, no, it's okay, and his head pops down, theirs will pop down too. And so a lot of times, most of the time, what I'm trying to help people with these days is to be able to start out around this 1,000-pound farm animal with a relaxed posture and a relaxed energy, and only have your posture and energy change when it means something, and don't make a whole lot of white noise. And that's when it becomes kind of a, self-development mindfulness practice, because I don't think you can just do that there. It spills over into other parts of life.
mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there's a group of horses I haven't seen for a while around here, but the one horse had a baby, and then there was always a horse I called Auntie, and she would follow the mom and the baby around. And these horses are not afraid of people because, unfortunately, people feed them. I think they feed them out of their cars and all kinds of things. Creates a problem. But if I was out there and I try and take pictures, like humans do, and the auntie would come up, between the mom and the baby and stand there and face me. And I'm like, I'm not coming closer. It's okay. And it was pretty obvious, the mom relied on her to do that job because the mom wasn't concerned.
And how did those kids in Uganda get all those proteins? Community. This whole raising a child in a house with one other person and not knowing your next door neighbors and sort of stuff, that goes against our whole how our bodies are supposed to work.
Well, definitely. Let me take a look at my questions. We've covered a lot of it just chatting.
I don't even think we've got to any of your questions yet, but that's all right.
That's usually how it goes, though. You just get started talking and it's just more organic. One thing I wanted to ask you, though, it's when you mentioned that you used to be interested in what you could get the horse to do, and then you shifted to more of this relationship based. So was there something that happened, or was it a gradual thing that caused you to shift your focus a little bit?
Well, I'd say I was kind of already doing it because in the whole scheme of horse training, I was on the empathetic end of the scale anyway. I wasn't just making horses do things they didn't want to do. I was quite good at teaching horses to decide to do the thing, to offer the behavior, but it was probably more, it was about getting the thing, and having them be happy with it or whatever. But what I really, the thing when I started working on the connection stuff, and I'll tell you in a minute what led me to that. But when I got to work on that stuff, then I realized, if you put this in first, the training itself, it's so much easier. And what actually led me to it was my wife bought a horse, and this is probably 2016, I think. My wife bought a horse, very well trained horse, had a few quirks about him, and I didn't have any problem solving those, but he just had an underlying level of tension that never came out of him, but I couldn't train out of him either. And so I stepped away from trying to make any difference with him, but it led me to realize that he was basically in a very functional level of shutdown. And it was around the same time, not because of that, but around the same time I started seeing a therapist. And how that came about was actually it was actually at a horse expo. It was when you do horse expos, most of the time they have you do horse demonstrations, but every once in a while, as well as horse demonstrations, you've got to do it like a stand-up talk, like in a lecture hall or something. And I had talked about at this one horse expo about how I was, I had this one horse and things, I couldn't really get into him the way I wanted to. And I started looking at different things and just started talking about that. And after that talk, I was talking to somebody and they said, "Oh, they didn't see it." And they said, "How'd the talk go?" And I said, I'm exhausted. I feel like I've been run over by a truck." And they said, "Oh, well, vulnerability does that to you. Brene Brown says." And I'd never heard of Brene Brown before that. And so I asked about who Brene Brown was. So I came home and I started reading some of Brene Brown's books, which I thought were fascinating because, 5 pages in, I'm like, this lady's been in my head. I'd never really read much where the other person writing the book had been in my head. Then partway through the book, she said, you cannot selectively suppress emotions. If you suppress the lower emotions, you're automatically suppressing the higher emotions. And growing up, male in rural Australia, boys don't show fear, boys don't cry, all that sort of stuff. And so I knew there was some of the lower emotions suppressed, but never thought about could I have more joy or happiness or whatever. And so I started going and seeing a therapist, but end result was I figured out that this horse was living in a shutdown state, a very functional shutdown state. And then I figured out I was too. I had been too. So it kind of basically took a horse to show me, or kind of lead me down a bit of a rabbit hole that led me to figure out that I'd been that way too. And then, then it went on from there. And then, luckily I was doing lots of clinics and I'd start to experiment with things at clinics. And I had an incident at a clinic in Texas that really, really cemented this for me. There was a Mustang in the clinic, and he has a random bolting problem. If you're riding a horse and it bolts, blindly bolts, that is a dangerous and a scary situation. Sometimes situations are scary, but they're not dangerous. It's just what your head's doing with the situation. But no, that's dangerous. Normally I don't try to fix the bolting. I try to fix what's causing the bolting. And I had asked the owner was there. The owner had the horse in the clinic, but the trainer was there too, and asked the trainer. And she said, it's not one thing, like it's not a consistent thing. It could be something that makes him bolt this day, 10 days later it doesn't make him bolt, but something else does, And I said, well, I'm not sure I can really help with that. I'd have to figure out the problem first. And during the clinic, this girl was standing in front of a horse and she wanted to walk down beside him and ask him to move his hind end over. Okay, something pretty simple. And as she went to walk down beside him, he kind of turned his head and kind of blocked her out. And she said, what do I do with this? He's blocking me out. And normally, if a horse was doing that, so I went over and I took the lead rope, but normally if a horse he turned his head and blocked me out, I would just kind of reach under his jaw with my hand, just move his head over softly and walk down there. Nothing aversive about it, nothing, no great deal of pressure, no correction, like, just excuse me, I'm going down this side of you. But with this horse, when I went to walk down that side and he turned his head, instead of continuing on, I stepped back to where I was. And I basically said, you don't like that. I'm unsure why you don't like that. And so I'm going to give you a minute and I just waited till he showed some sign of relaxing from what just happened. Maybe his ears started to move more. When horses get tense, their rate of blinking starts to slow down. And so maybe his eyes started blinking faster. I'm not sure. But anyway, I tried it again. He blocked me out. I did that for probably 10 minutes and eventually he lets me walk down there. And so I said, I think probably you've overdone this. You've come down here and asked to step over behind them, went back to the front and did it again, and just bored him to death. It's like, so I'll show you. I'm going to ask him to step over behind, then I'm going to step back to his front, and he's probably going to block me out again. So I asked him to move over behind. I stepped back to his front. He lets me down there. I said, I'll do it again. I go to the front. He lets me down there. And I did it probably 10 or 12 times, and I couldn't get him to say no anymore. And I said, I don't know what I did, but he's not saying, no, I don't want you to do that anymore. But I kind of conducted a science experiment. I thought he was sick of being asked to do that thing that he knows how to do. But I did it 12 times in a row and he didn't say no. So that's how I work. It's like, okay, I had an idea what I thought it was causing it. And now I don't know what's causing it because it's not that. And I gave him back to her and she said, what do you want me to do? And I said, just hang out with him for a bit. Just stand there. I'll go help somebody else. Anyway, 10 minutes later, I was helping somebody else and I heard this collective gasp from the crowd. And I turned and looked, and this horse is buckled at the knees and plopped to his belly and he's asleep, like with his head vertical, snoring little dust clouds in the dirt. Then he has a roll. Then he gets up, has a shake, boom, down he goes again. Like dropped like he's been shot. And I said to the owner, is that normal? Because if it's normal, it's nothing, is it? I said, is that normal? And she said, I've had him for 6 years and I've seen him lay down once. And I'm like, oh, okay. He slept till lunchtime, and that was probably about 10 o'clock in the morning. So he slept for a couple of hours, didn't move. We got him up. At the time, we used to have two groups, a morning group and an afternoon group. She was in the morning group. So we woke him up at lunchtime to get him out of the arena so the other group could come in. And the next morning when she came in, she said, what do you want me to do? And I said, just hang on with him. Just hang out with him. Let's see what he is telling us today, and then we'll go from there. 20 minutes later, boom, down he went. He slept for 4 hours, like unconscious. And so I come home from that clinic and I knew like this horse, she hasn't seen him lay down 6 years and he just slept for 4 hours with a microphone and other horses riding around. Like, this is a monstrous change from how this horse normally is. So I knew something had happened. I had no idea what had happened or why it had happened. I came home and looked up on the internet about sleeping habits of horses. And we all know horses can sleep standing up or laying down. But what I didn't realize is the standing up is napping. But in order to get that deep restorative sleep, that REM sleep, they have to lay prone. And in order to lay prone, they have to feel safe. They have to have at least one herd member who stands watch. And I realized what had happened was when I stepped over there to walk around him and he said no, if I'd have said, excuse me, I'm off to do this thing, I was saying I'm not aware enough to understand the importance of you saying no. I'm just like, no, you're not saying no, you're saying yes, And so I communicated that level of awareness to him. He's like, well, hell, if you're that aware, you could be aware while I have a nap. And so then I started really with at clinics trying to figure out how much I could get done just by communicating my awareness. And then I started to communicating awareness just became a part of, there's that first, that gets to the connection, but then a part of the training. So it's not relationship instead of horsemanship. It's relationship before horsemanship, but then that relationship is still a part of that horsemanship too. Like, so there's the relationship. I had the lady on the podcast from Sweden, the animal communicator lady I was talking about, she has a great saying that she says, giving versus trading. Everything I'd been doing up till the point of what I'm doing now has been trading. Okay, I will do this, so you will do this. When I was stepping back with that Mustang, I wasn't trading. I wasn't expecting a change in the outcome. I was just giving. I was saying, oh, I saw that. Saw you didn't like that. Not, I saw you didn't like that, and so I'm going to step back here, and I'm going to do that for 10 minutes, and then you're going to lay down and have a sleep. It wasn't that. Funny thing is, that was 5 years later, he still hadn't bolted once. It solved the bolting problem.
Wow. The
bolting problem went away. Why would it? So, he wasn't getting enough REM sleep or any REM sleep. And we know with humans, if you don't get enough REM sleep, you are either irritable or anxious. What might cause a prey animal to bolt? Anxiety. So I solved basically reset his nervous system, and the bolting went away. He actually just passed away here recently. So I used to say, it's been 6 years and he hasn't bolted since, but he's not bolting now. He's bolting up in heaven now. But so that was a thing that made me like that. So first they've got to have the feeling of safety. And I realized most horse training techniques, or a lot of horse training techniques, are to deal with a horse that doesn't feel completely safe. And they're only there because the horse doesn't feel completely safe. And if the horse does feel completely safe, we don't need to use them. And there's varying levels of feeling. Some it's I feel 90% safe, and some of it's I feel 10% safe. And those would be the way more aversive things. But you can get the horse to feel 100% safe. And then they offer you so much more than, it's not about just mere obedience. It's about connection, and they're really into whatever you're doing with them.
Mm. So you mentioned expectations, and it's a big thing I've learned to shut out of my mind, because if you have any, a feral dog will somehow know it. But I found that really interesting. I think you mentioned a bit about how entering a horse's stall can be a lot of pressure for the horse. And I forget if it said that using food in particular can be a lot of pressure for the horse. And I was hoping you could talk about expectations.
Well, I think expectations and that are slightly different, but using food for proximity, that's trading.
Mm-hmm.
That is trading food for proximity, and that trading dynamic has an energy to it that I think they can sense. It's just like the expectation thing. But expectations, if you get into like marital relation type work, one of the biggest problems is in marital relations is unmet expectations. That's what causes all the problems, because we come to a relationship thinking this person's going to provide this thing to make me feel better, and that's, what do they call that? Codependency. Whereas when having expectations of the other is the relationship killer in human relationships. And so expectations, they kind of expectations get in the way of, I don't know, there's an energy, that giving energy, like if I had known that the Mustang was going to lay down, have a sleep for 4 hours after I was stepping back, I probably would have been stepping back with a different energy, like I'm doing the thing, and he's going to do the thing, rather than, oh, that bothers you? Okay, I was only stepping back because he said, I don't want you to do that. That bothers me somehow. Even though I didn't understand why it bothered him, I was communicating, and it's the same thing. The whole man comes home from work and his wife says, he says, how was your day? And she says, oh, this happened at work. And instead of just listening, he wants to fix the problem. Okay. You've probably experienced that sometime in your life.
Yeah.
That's having expectations kind of brings that bit of that energy. And probably the hard thing with having a process that might bring a certain outcome is you can't have an expectation doing the thing, even though somewhere that there's going to be an outcome. Like one of the things I have people do with their horses, if you've got a horse who's not that interested in you, I'm not talking about a horse that likes hanging out with you. I tell people, go out in the pasture and just sit down, read a book, meditate, scroll through Facebook. I don't care. Just go out there and sit there with no expectation of anything happening. And if you do that for long enough, at some point in time, your horse will change their thoughts about what a person showing up means. Because usually a person shows up and they want something from me. Okay. Every time a person goes near a horse, they want something. I want to catch you, brush you, groom you, ride you. I want to move you. Horses spend a lot of time just hanging out. And so I say, try that. So I was at a horse expo in Ohio last year, and a lady came up to the booth and she said, hey, I've been doing that thing you said. So for the past 2 weeks, I've been going out in the pasture with my horse and sitting down with no expectation. Anyway, it's been 2 weeks and he hasn't come up to me. What should I do? And I said, do you realize you just told me you're going out there supposedly with no expectation, and now your expectations that you say you don't have haven't been met and you want to know what to do? Like she said, she was doing it with no expectation, but he hasn't come up to me yet. And so the hard part of knowing that there could be a certain outcome from an action is not expecting the action to happen, being able to separate yourself from that. And that's hard. That's hard to do. But I think there is an energy behind that. And most people I help at clinics and things are, the demographic is probably 30 to 70-year-old women. Most, if you look on my YouTube channel, that's the demographic. It looks like that. The highest point's in the middle. And so it's easy to give an analogy to women where I say, do you ever go on a first date with a guy and he was nice, everything was good. There was nothing weird about it. But I just kind of got the idea that the only reason this guy is buying me dinner and taking me to a movie is to not necessarily enjoy the dinner and the movie, but I've got to tick these boxes so we get to the next thing. And I said, you see everybody's head starts nodding. And I said, and you couldn't, if someone videoed the whole thing, you couldn't say, see that thing you did right there? That's it. It's not a thing. It's an energy. It's your female intuition, your spidey senses on a first date are pretty like, I'm making sure I'm safe here. And so you're looking for any of that weirdness. And I think there's an energy to that giving versus trading thing. That first date really should be a giving thing. Like, I'm just going to enjoy my time with you, not I'm going to do this so we get to this. And I really feel like animals who are way more in tune with their senses than we are can really feel the difference in that. So if you have that, I think that's where expectation comes in.
Well, it was, I wish I would have recorded this because it was very cool, but we were rehabbing a dog that had been in a hoarding case, and she was a husky mix. And one of the shelter workers really liked this dog. She has a thing for huskies. And we had gotten her walking on a leash, and we were walking her on a leash a little bit. And I see all of a sudden the dog goes like that and, moves away. And I said, did you just think about petting that dog? And she said, yes. I said, don't think that. So it was that clear that something had changed in her mind that caused the dog to.
And if you think about, why was she petting the dog? Why was she wanting to pet the dog?
Because it helps us feel better.
Was it a giving thing or was it a trading thing?
Yeah.
Am I going to pet you because in this very moment, the thing that will make this dog feel better about our relationship is this? Or was it, I want to pet the dog because I like the fluffy feel of husky? Like, that's a trading thing. Yeah. And that's the thing is you've got to initially, you've got to be in the giving thing. You can't be in the trading thing. But once their nervous system's regulated and there's all the trust and whatever, then you can start to get what you want out of the relationship, whether it's a horse or a dog or a human.
Mm-hmm.
But initially it can't be about you. And that's the thing is you've got to be able to, like we say with a horse, or like in this case, there's things that are completely normal that aren't good for like these trauma cases and stuff, like the touching. Okay. It's, for me, it's almost really, it's come down to like a consent-based thing for me. I was at doing a clinic the other day, the clinic in Washington. I was talking to the crowd about a lot of times people do things without thinking about it that communicate their lack of awareness of things. And there was a horse standing right in front of me. I had the lead rope. And I said, here's a good example. And I reached out and I started rubbing him between the eyes, and he turned his head about 45 degrees, like trying to get away from me. And I kept patting him. And so he kind of stopped there. And I'm patting on him. I said, see what I'm doing? And everybody's like, you're patting the horse. I said, no, I reached up to pat him. And he went, no, I don't want you to do that. And I said, I'm not listening. And he said, okay, well, I'll just go internal and let you do whatever it is you're going to do to me. And I went, oh, I missed it. But when I reached out to pat him, he didn't go, like, horse wants to get patted between the eyes. When you go to pat him between the eyes, they stay right there. He just like, no. He said no, and I didn't take that no away. I didn't honor that no, and I kept rubbing. He's like, well, it's not that invasive, so I'm just going to let you do it. But I told you I didn't want you to do it. And so then they're kind of in that level of kind of just do whatever it is you're going to do, sort of thing. You know what I mean? But I do think there's a lady from Washington State named Elsa Sinclair, amazing with horses. And one of her sayings is, good leaders only ask yes questions. And I like to tell people, yeah, you've got to ask yes questions, because if you ask no questions, and I don't mean you ask a question that you can shape into a yes. I'm talking about a flat out no. Every time you ask a flat out no question, not only do you get a no, but you also get a differing in their opinion of you based on the fact you asked that question. And a lot of times people, you're kind of cocking your head right now like, what do you mean? I'm like, think about this. You go on a first date with a guy. He's cool. Yeah, I like the guy. He was okay. Yep, he's not Brad Pitt, but it's good. So it's not on either end of the spectrum. It's kind of in the middle, You go on a second date, and halfway through the second date, he gets down on one knee, pops open a ring box, and asks you to marry him. What do you say? And everybody we'd say no. And I said, okay, you said no, but is your opinion of him the same as it was before he got down on one knee and asked you that question on the second date? Like, no, now we're like, this guy's weird. And I said, that's the thing. When you ask a no question, not only do you get a no, but you've communicated to the other in that, whatever it is, horse, dog, human, that you are not reading the room very well. Like a flat out no means you asked a question that shouldn't have been asked, and it was probably pretty obvious it shouldn't have been asked. And so their opinion of your opinion, basically, their opinion of your ability to read the room and make good decisions has gone downhill. Does that make sense? So and that's not, like I said, that's not asking questions that can be shaped into like you're talking about putting the lead on me for, unless of course based on their experience that they're going to get choked out or something or other, and then it's a hard no. Well, then you wouldn't be worried about trying to ignore that and try to get the lead on. Would be just, you'd be going downhill from there, sort of thing.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I really love that saying, good leaders only ask yes questions. And I think a yes question is something they know how to do. And on top of that, something they know how to do and are capable of doing it given the current environment and their emotional state at the time. Oh, he could do it yesterday, you know. And then the other yes, so that's one yes question. The other yes question is one they don't know the answer to, but based on all the training leading up to this point in time, they can figure it out.
Mm-hmm.
The yes is findable. You know, it'd be like if you taught a kid to count, but you hadn't taught them to add yet, and you go, "What's 2 plus 2?" And you hold 2 fingers up on one hand and 2 fingers in the other hand, and they go, "I don't know." And you say, "Well, can you count these fingers?" They go, "Oh yeah, 1, 2, 3, 4." So you change the question. The answer's still the same. You just change the question. That's mostly what you are doing. I think what I'm doing, expanding their knowledge bubble or their comfort zone or whatever. That's where you're playing with that. But it's got to be something they don't know how to do, but easily figure outable.
Mm-hmm.
It can't be a flat out no, because like I said, you asked that flat out no question. Not only did you get a no, but now their opinion of your ability to ask good questions is compromised. So the next question you ask, they've got a bit of doubt, like, the dude that gets down on one knee and pops the ring, and you say no, and then he goes, "Hey, do you want to go over and hang at my friend's house?" I'm like, "No, I'm not sure what sort of friends you'll have after you have that level of unawareness." You know what I mean?
Yeah, no, it makes sense.
And so these are all the little things. These are the thinking about patting the husky.
Yeah.
Just so many little things that people will do that, like the yelling at the dog thing. I've never done what you suggested. I'm sitting here thinking, oh God, I do that with horses. That's so simple. Because we've got a dog that he is the protector of our yard, and if a bird lands in the yard, he will bark at the dog till the bird goes away. He's not barking at nothing. He's always barking at something.
You could try it and see how it works. I have my dogs think the mortal enemy are the crows that fly over. Mm-hmm. They protect our airspace.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And I don't always run with them after the crows. I'm not that fast, but I'm like, yeah, it's a crow, and they can have fun with the crows. I don't care if they chase them across the yard. But the other thing I do with the dogs too that I found helps, and I don't know if it'd be interesting to know if horses would do this, but the first thing we do when I let them out in the morning is we walk around the perimeter of our fence. Just to, see what happened. They can smell whatever had been there the night before, check for danger. And I used to have a dog that was very territorial. So very problematic with visitors coming in, and she was not afraid. She was just territorial. And I started doing this with her too, like joining her in that a little bit. She didn't live long enough for me to finish that experiment, but with these guys, I find it really helps because they just know that I'm aware. And if I forget and I get distracted looking at my phone or whatever, I can feel them just disconnecting and going to do their own thing.
Mm-hmm.
So, the dogs help keep me, they've helped me immensely, obviously, for personally.
Well, but think about that though. If I think that's the big point of all this stuff is if we can help them the right way, so that be in that giving state versus that trading state, we have to be in the right mental place, and it's the mental place we've got to be in a certain mental place, and it's the mental place we should be. And when we're not capable of delivering that, it's the mental place we shouldn't be when we're very distracted by this thing, or whatever.
Yeah. So my friend has a question for you that recommended your book to me. And we're both dog trainers, but she has horses as well. And we have an idea for feral dog workshops where the feral dogs would also, they'd get trained, they get some rehabilitation, but also it would be a little bit of a self-discovery thing for the students as well, practicing on being present and all these things. That's easier to do when you're away from your normal life too, I think. But we're looking at some things they do with horses similarly. And she was wondering what your thoughts were about putting a time limit on, training wild horses, if that.
Oh, that's right. Your question was if you were involved in a 100-day Mustang makeover thing.
Yeah. If you think the time limit, it might put too much pressure on the trainers and the horses, or if you think, maybe it's a motivation or how that could play out.
Yeah, I'm not big on the whole time limit thing. Your question, it said, if you were in a 100-day Mustang makeover thing, and when I was reading, I'm like, well, I wouldn't be. I think as soon as you put that time limit thing on there, there's a bit of, there's some ego to the whole thing. But your question was, how would you start out? I would start out communicating my awareness of their awareness. And that might be with a Mustang. That might be from a long way away. I went to a Mustang sanctuary here a couple of years ago for a couple of days to help them out. And this place has a herd of 200 Mustangs that will never go anywhere. But they also they have trainers and they get in Mustangs from different places and train them and rehome them. And they're the ones I went up there to help them with. And they had one horse in this pen. He was close to like where the barn was and the road went right by there and stuff. And he was in this pen. Let's say it's 50 by 100 feet, something like that, whatever. He's been in there, and the reason they put him there is because he needs to get used to things, and he's not getting any better. They've had him up there for a year or something or other. And so, every car that comes in, drives by there, every person does anything, walks by, there's a lot of activity, and he's just not getting any better. And so we were across the road he was on one side of a dirt road, and the barns and stuff on the other side of the dirt road, And we were in the barn, or right by the barn, and they were telling me all about him. And I said, okay. And they said he has never walked up to anybody yet. You can kind of sneak up on him and corner him, but he's never come up to anybody yet. He's just not getting any better. Very suspicious. I said, okay, well, I'll get started with him. And I stood up, and everybody stood up, and I said, where are you going? And he said, well, we're coming over with you to work on him. I said, I'm starting here. Okay, so he's standing over in that pen, and he was kind of standing side onto us with one foot cocked, and his ears were kind of internally fixated. He's just kind of vegging there. And so I got out of the chair and I started to walk, and I didn't even get to the edge of the road on the barn side of the road, not his side of the road, when he flicked an ear towards me, and I stopped and I stepped backwards. And I waited till he kind of went back to sleep, and I walked forward again, and then he noticed me. And when he noticed me, I communicated that I noticed him. And then I'm in the middle of the road, and then I'm across the road, and then I'm up against the fence, and he still hasn't moved yet. They say normally when you approach his pen, he walks to the back of the pen. And it's, like I said, it's probably 50 feet wide and 100 feet deep or something. And he's probably halfway down it. Then I get to where I climb over the fence. And every time he notices me, I tell him I notice him. Then I get a bit closer. And at one point in time, I'm maybe 15 feet from him or something or other. And he hasn't walked away yet. So I stopped, and I turned around to the people over at the barn. I said, so you said he usually walks away when you get in here. You might notice I've climbed the fence and I'm 15 feet from him, and he hasn't walked away yet. And as I said that, I felt something on my hip pocket, and I looked back, and he's walked up and he's sniffing me. And they said he's never walked up to anybody. And I said, okay, so this horse, what I would do with him, I'd move him away from here, away from all the activity, get him as far away as possible, wherever you put him, and one person gets to feed and clean. And if they're heading down towards where he lives on the ATV with the hay on the back, and he's standing over there and his head pops up and, oh, there's an ATV coming, stop. Like, put the brakes on, stop. And whatever he's looking at you, just stay there. And when he stops looking at you and goes back to like, oh, well, no big deal, then you can start to approach again. But as soon as his focus changing, it stop. And I said, I would do that. I would do that, and that would probably make the huge difference. You know, you rehab feral dogs, and they've possibly had some suboptimal interactions with humans, maybe. I did a clinic a few years ago, and there was a lady in the clinic that said, before we start, my horse hates men. He's had some nasty stuff done to him, and he hates men. I'm like, okay, well, thanks for telling me. So these days I do clinics with groups of 3, and she was in the arena. Her and her horse were on the arena, like it's an oblong. Let's say it's 100 by 200 feet. She is halfway down the arena on one side, on the long side, and the gate to get in is on the opposite side, so it's 100 feet away. And she was already in there before I walked into the arena for their session. And so before I walked in that gate, I looked across at that pony. He wasn't aware of me. And so I opened the gate and I turned and I started to walk directly towards him. As I did, he saw me, felt my energy coming towards him, and he snorted and he looked away. And I stopped and I stepped backwards and I said, I see there's a boundary that I just crossed and I'm aware of it. I'm going to step back. And I waited till he basically forgot I was there. Then I 3 steps forward. Oh, he snorts, 2 steps backwards. Well, 3 steps forward, 1 step backwards, whatever. As soon as I crossed that line. And every time I stepped towards him, he would look away and think about leaving. And that happened till I was halfway across the arena. From about halfway across the arena, I'd wait till he wasn't looking at me, and then I'd start to walk towards him. Instead of him snorting and looking away, his nose would reach in, he looked towards me like, what's that guy doing? And I'd stop. I didn't stop and step backwards because there's no reason to retreat now because I haven't crossed a boundary. Does that make sense? Anyway, went all the way across and ended up getting all the way up to him. And I'm not sneaking up to him, but I get all the way up to him. He reaches out and he's like, hey, how's it going? And we have a little chat, Then I leave there and I say, just hang with him for a bit. And I walk to the other end of the arena, the short end of the arena, to help somebody else. And I get them started on what they're going to do. Now, the other person is at the complete other end of the arena. So I'm going to walk all the way down there to help the third person. I'm walking down the arena. And as I'm walking down the arena, this horse that hates men sees me walking that way and drags his owner over to say hello to me. And so that communicating awareness from wherever that awareness starts, it's not like it doesn't start when you get in there. If you haven't noticed them before you get in there and they're already bouncing off the back fence, you've already told them how much you don't read the situation. Then you try to read the situation from there, you're already at a loss. So if I had a Mustang like that, I'd start communicating my awareness from as far away as wherever they are. And I started doing this years ago in Kenya. When I said I was in Kenya, we'd go for a walk of an afternoon, and there'd be a herd of zebra all grazing, and I'd be walking along, and whenever their heads popped up, I would stop and stand still. And their heads would go back down. And then you keep walking, and your heads pop up, and you stop and stand still. And you can get really quite close to them doing that. But if you just kept, when their heads popped up, if you just kept taking 3 more steps, you'd have a herd of galloping zebra. So that's probably that's how I would go about. But see, that's not how I'd go about a Mustang. That's how I'd go about any sentient being. You know what I mean? They just happen to be more on high alert. I had a lady on the podcast who was one of the things she used to do was a mountain lion tracker in Idaho. And she did a lot of wilderness survival school stuff when she was a kid, but she talks about what's known as your ring of disturbance. And she said, when you walk through nature, there's a ring of disturbance that surrounds you, that goes ahead of you. And the more peaceful you can get inside and the more you can quiet that chatter in your mind and stuff, the smaller that ring of disturbance gets. And she said they listen to birdsong a lot, and as you approach, the song of birds will change from whatever they were doing. And she said, your goal is to get to where you can walk through woods and the bird song does not change. That's another level of stuff. But so she talks about that ring of disturbance. You've got to understand where is the animal's ring of disturbance. And a lot of times with, say, feral horses, it's a whole lot further away than you would think it is. Think about in those Mustang holding pens. There is no communicating your awareness of that ring of disturbance because they're already in it. Does that make sense there? And I think Mustangs can very easily go into shutdown mode quite easily because 6-foot panels, they can't escape. They're in a place they don't want to be, so they just can kind of make it go away a little bit. I think I've probably seen more Mustangs that are shut down than the opposite, just in the experiences I've had at clinics and stuff. I'm not saying I'm any Mustang expert and have had a lot to do with them, but in general, they seem to be, if they can get them in the trailer and get them to the clinic, they've had enough handling to where they're kind of shut down.
It seems like, too, with that horse you were explaining, he went from being apprehensive to curious. And I find with the dogs, if I can connect with them enough that they feel safe enough to start being curious, and then I can be curious with them too, and take them. And I mean, it's kind of like having a toddler, how their whole world is like discoveries, right? Everything is a discovery. And with a dog, especially if they've been in a shelter for 2 or 3 months without any breaks from being in their kennel, I can help them once they stop being so afraid. They start using their nose, and I can start like helping them with that curiosity. It's almost, kids are always curious. It sounds like the horse was curious about you.
That's the thing is, in the ascending of things, curiosity comes before fear. Unless, of course, there's been a lot of interactions with that whatever, which is a person. Then their first thing's probably going to be fear. But like those zebra, they're over there grazing. I'm walking along and their head pops up. They're like, what's that over there? And if you can stop there, but if I kept walking, it would turn to fear. And then if you put them in a pen or whatever, it would take quite a while before you get that fear back to curiosity. But curiosity in a natural state comes before fear. They don't just, like, there's no use to run away from every twig that moves because you're using a lot of energy that you could expend, you could keep in case, a lion shows up.
Yeah.
Think about, their horses are energy conservers because, prey animals are energy conservers because let's say a lion uses up too much energy on unneeded things, and then when he gets into a foot race, he loses it. He doesn't have breakfast. If a horse uses up a lot of energy on unnecessary things and gets in a foot race and loses it, he is breakfast. Yeah. And so they are energy conservers. And so they're not going to run away first. Especially like in the wild, usually the distance of something novel is far enough away that they become curious about it first, aware of it, curious. If it keeps approaching, then you're getting into that worried state. But if if this dog's been in a shelter for a long time, they're way past curious and they're into that defensive sort of a thing. And that's just their experience with humans. So then you're not starting with, it's not like they're a feral dog that's out in the middle of the desert.
Right.
And you'll walk along and, 2 miles away, they see you and you see them sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, and by the time I get, they're usually shut down and all kinds of things just from being in that environment and so scared and everything.
Yeah, the shutdown, that's the thing with, like say with horses, people that have out of control horses, dangerous horses, those horses are anxious. But the most common one's the shutdown. And I'd say not a lot of people know how to deal with them because they're, a lot of times they consider the horses lazy. It is not in the best interest of a prey animal to be lazy. And so if they don't have access to available activation, there's a reason for it, and it would be that shutdown state. And for me, understanding the shutdown state has been, and understanding how you can bring them out of that, that's been the big game changer. I mean, that horse that we got years ago was in that shutdown state, and it took me quite a while to figure out. And I didn't even figure it out with him. He spent 2 years in a pasture, and I didn't even touch him because I'm like, I don't know how to help him. But then I got to experiment with all these horses at clinics. And when I did figure out what I could do to help him, then I came back to it.
Yeah, having this access, whenever I want, I can go to the shelter and work with several feral dogs in a day. So I have an opportunity that a lot of people don't have because I live where I live. So it's provided me just, by having that many dogs to work with, it's just provided me access, and that way I can, perfect things and experiment with things that I see working and, improve on it for the next dog and the next dog.
Right.
And the next dog.
Yeah.
So, not to
Yeah,
mention.
that's a blessing, having access to especially having access to a lot of, traumatized dogs. I think you probably really start to learn the nuances because they're all slightly different, and you figure out what's something that works for every dog, and then what are the gray areas of where do you need to. That's where the art comes in, I think.
Yeah, well, they keep you from getting to feeling too too knowledgeable, because once you start to think, oh, I kind of know what I'm doing, then you meet one who just, destroys that and is different, and you have to start over. Sort of.
Yes. It goes a bit like that, doesn't
it? Let me see what this last question is. This is also from Kelly, my friend. Insights into how a wild predator animal versus prey animal responds to connection and relationship in the early stages of building trust. And of course, her and I talk about this a lot because she also goes to the shelter and works with feral dogs, and how the vagus nervous system would be different between predator and prey animal. But usually when we're working with the feral dogs, they are prey animals. They think they are prey animals at that point. They're afraid of anything and everything might hurt them. So I don't know how that would be different. I think it starts to be different once they start to gain some more confidence. That's my own observation. And they become more like a dog than a prey animal.
Yeah, I used to base some things I did on prey animal and predator thing, but if you watch trail cam footage on Instagram often enough, you'll see a mountain lion playing with a raccoon at 3 a.m. in the morning, or prey and predator doing things together. And I don't want to get all Snow Whitey, like, oh, everybody loves each other. But if you watch, watch National Geographic, there's a lion and zebras drinking out of the same thing.
Right.
And I don't think it has to do with whether you're a prey or a predator. It's whether you are exhibiting predatory behavior, because the prey animals will hang out with predators when they're not acting predatory.
Yeah.
And so I'm not, these days I'm not as big in the whole prey versus predator as far as the interactions with them. I will talk about that in as far as, it's not a good idea for a prey animal to be lazy and not have access to available energy, because you're going to be the first one that gets eaten. But as far as the interactions themselves, I do think basing the whole training thing on the fact that we're predators and they're prey animals is that's not really how that's not really how nature works. So yeah, I don't really subscribe so much to that anymore. And it seems to be that I get along so much better with horses when I drop that, drop that projection and think more about the connection. Think more about what do we have in common versus what are the differences we have. Focus more on the things we have in common. We're always told not to anthropomorphize, and so anthropomorphizing is projecting human emotions and qualities onto something that's non-human. And I'm talking about, say, with horses here. But I think a lot of times when we learn to not anthropomorphize, we forget to mammalize. We forget to see the things that we have that are similar. Because we're not supposed to anthropomorphize. So they're animals and we're people and they're horses, so we have nothing in common. Like, there are certain things we don't have in common, but there's probably way more we do. And the more I've looked at it that way, the more I'm like, God, this is a whole lot easier than it used to be. These horses actually like us and want to be around us. And that's without treats. That's without trading. That's the giving thing. Like I said, you can put a goat in with a horse, and as long as there's someone to keep an eye out for danger, to share that awareness burden, I'm good with it. And if it happens to be a predator, they seem to be good with that too. So I've really kind of given up on the predator prey paradigm.
Yeah, and
as far as it comes to the relationships.
right. Well, and predators can become prey very quickly.
Right.
So,
well, that's the thing. We forget that we are prey too. Like, we live in houses and, have police and have guns and whatever. But like, I'm going to Kenya next year to do this 500-kilometer horse race through Kenya. I will not be an apex predator in that environment.
Right.
I will be in a different environment.
Well, even where I live, people are like, "Oh, aren't you scared out there?" I'm like, "Well, what?" The main predator doesn't live around here, which is humans.
Right.
So when the Albuquerque is well known for its crime, and so we moved out here, and luckily, I feel much safer out here with the animals than I do with human crime. But
where are you now?
I'm in a place called Sandia Park, so it's east of Albuquerque. It's called the East Mountain. It's literally over the mountain from Albuquerque.
You go out 40?
You go out 40, and it's up Route 14. I don't know how familiar you are of the area.
I've driven 40 a lot, but I've
maybe 8 miles east of Albuquerque is the exit.
Okay, and then you go north from there.
You come up. My last question, since this is the title of my podcast, is what have dogs taught you, or in your case, horses? And I know this is a huge question, really, but are there certain things that just really stand out for you that you've learned?
I'd probably sum it up with the value of connection. Like, understanding that has made me understand more about me. I get along better with my wife. But really, when you really get into it, it starts with a connection with yourself that I think a lot of us because of our cultural and societal upbringing, you think about as a kid, you are not a good kid unless you do a good thing. You're a good boy, you're a good boy because you did this. Not, you're not good. You're a good boy because you did this. And so you kind of get disconnected a bit from self. And yeah, I think horses really helped me understand the value of connection with me, with my wife, with the world at large, with animals, with plants, trees, rocks, whatever.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, our dogs, well, they're happy with me just because I'm here. I don't have, well, they like it if I feed them and walk them and all of that, but yeah, I don't have to, bake a cake or earn a certain amount of money or any of these
Right.
things, right? To have my dogs like me, which is, yeah, you're right. I haven't
And what's funny is horses are actually the same way too.
But all right. Well, I mean, thank you so much for doing this
Hey,
podcast
no
with.
worries at all. It's been fun. Good questions.
Just like I asked you, and then you said yes, and I'm like, oh, okay. Now I'm nervous.
Nothing to be nervous about.
It's really enjoyable. I really enjoyed it, and I'd love to come as a spectator to one of your events. I think it would be great fun to watch.
Yeah, you'd get a lot out of it as a dog trainer. I have quite a few dog trainers that follow some of my stuff. But I've had dog trainers come to clinics, but also psychiatrists come to clinics that say, "Oh yeah, what you're doing with those horses? We do that with people all the time." I've had dog trainers say, "What you're doing with those horses? We do with dogs." So it's not like it's one or the other.
Yeah.
All this stuff's all connected to each other.
Yeah. Yeah. It's cross training.
It surely is. It's just just watching. Like I've actually learned quite a bit from some dog training books that I got years ago. One was The Other End of the Leash. Have you ever read The Other End of the Leash?
Yeah.
And Don't Shoot the Dog by Karen Pryor.
Yes.
They all gave me little, yeah, it's kind of the same sort of thing. But I don't, I think it's all like a discipline. It could be a martial art.
Mm-hmm.
And you might start out martial arts because you don't want to get beat up at school or whatever. But eventually, if you stay with it long enough, it has nothing to do with that. And it's just another way of understanding the truths of life. It's just another way of learning it. And I think that dog training, horse training, martial arts, whatever it is you want to do, if you do something long enough and get into it enough, it'll teach you life lessons. And they all end up being the same life lessons.
Very true. I started karate in November. I did yoga for years and years and wanted to try something that required a little different muscle movement and things. And I kind of feel like I'm in a Star Wars movie sometimes when I'm there, very Yoda-esque lessons in life, but they all apply, and how he talks about being present and being aware and all kinds of things. It all relates to dog training. So it's fascinating how it all is coming together.
And I bet you're finding that the karate is helping your dog training, but your dog training experience is helping your karate too.
It's a little awkward at my age to start karate, but yeah, I think it does, just because I can be present in the class.
The mindset part of it, understanding that mindset part of it.
Yeah, the movements.
Yeah, that's different.
But yeah, I can be present in the class and pay attention and learn things and stuff like that. So yeah, I think that's definitely helped me, and as it would learning anything,
right?
That you can shut out the world and focus on something is very useful. So, but yeah, it's been a pleasure.
Okay, well, great chatting with you.
Thanks again to Warwick Schiller for being on this podcast. I think it'll be very helpful for anyone struggling with a dog, even if you're not struggling with a dog, how to improve your relationship with a dog. And also just a lot of things to think about in how we relate to other mammals and other humans as well. I also want to say that on Warwick's website, he talks about supportive community. And I just want to say I really appreciate him supporting my community of listeners and the dog community by sharing his insights on this podcast today. Again, please check out his website, warwickschiller.com, and join me next time on What Dogs Have Taught Me to learn more insights about what our animal friends can teach us.